Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third session of Stone Soup Group's virtual parent conference for 2020. And I'm Mary Middleton. I'm the executive director here at Stone Soup Group. Thank you all for joining us today so that we can continue this discussion that we've been having about what it means to live a person-directed life. Today we'll learn more about the dignity of risk and what that looks like, and what it looks like in decision making, and even what it looks like in mistake making. So Rory Scheller will be joining us to lead us in that discussion today. This is our third of 4 sessions for our virtual parent conference. We should have had an in-person conference back in March, but had to transition to this virtual format. But really excited that you're able to be with us today, and hope you can join us next week as well for our last session. Again, it'll be on Wednesday at 2 p.m. There are a lot of people who worked really hard to make this happen, a big planning committee, and especially with the transition from our in-person format to the online format, and a lot of sponsors who contributed to this to make it happen. So just to take a minute to thank them, the Alaska Brain Injury Network, the Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority, All for Kids Pediatric Therapy, the ARC of Anchorage, the Bering Straits Native Corporation, Down Syndrome Network, Matt Nuska Telephone Association Foundation, the Matsu Health Foundation, Reading Right Alaska, and CISA, the Special Education Service Agency. Really thankful for their support. Just a couple of housekeeping things. Everyone is currently muted. You'll stay muted throughout today's presentation. The session, all of our parent conference sessions are being recorded, including today, and will be available after the series is finished. Roy has asked that you hold your questions until the end. You'll be able to unmute yourself to ask questions after his presentation. And you can also post questions to the chat, and our staff will be monitoring that. And then there'll be time at the end to have discussion. So for today's session, it's Dr. Rory Scheller who's joining us to present about the dignity of risk. Rory's from New York and has a degree in anthropology, and originally worked in salvage archaeology before moving to Boston and beginning his career in the field of disabilities. In 2010, he received his doctorate degree and did a doctoral dissertation on social capital and community volunteerism. It was in 1978 that he moved to Alaska and joined Hope Community Resources that very same year. And he played a key role there in helping to develop Hope's corporate culture and service delivery standards. Roy held many positions at Hope, starting in direct support, and eventually was Hope's executive director from 2014 to 2020. He was primarily involved in the internal management of the organization, as well as overseeing the growth and development of the agency on a state, national, and international level. Roy served as an adjunct professor with the Waterford Institute of Technology and Art in Ireland, and is also published in Practicing Anthropology. We're really excited to have Rory with us today, so welcome, and I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, and thank the staff for Stone Group for helping me become more technology efficient today. The concept, there's 2 concepts that have been out there for a long time, probably my entire career. One is person-directed or self-directed, has been around since the late 70s, and a person's right to risk has also been around since the late 70s. And what I hope to do today is talk about them as they join together. But my plan is to reframe the issue, to change the dialogue, and to partway through our session today, I'll be opening it up for conversations and questions and problem solving so that we can get a good dialogue going. Because I think the issues will be more important in the dialogues than in just the academic part. Mary has set the stage about me. So I've truly, about 45 years in the field and 42 in Alaska. But through that whole time, I've been working with many people, working with many families, many staff, having lots of interactions. And I've learned some lessons that I distill into 2 points. And one of those is rotating the prism. You may have heard me say that in a variety of meetings, but when there's conflict, when there's challenges, when there's a difficult moment, and we're trying to move forward, I will refer to the need to rotate the prism. And I think many of you will remember having seen a prism with the sunlight coming through it, and you get a variety of colors that are showing. But if you rotate that prism or spin that prism or even gently move it, those colors change and you see it from a whole different perspective. And I think it's been one of the most powerful examples that I've found of how to move through conflict is to get the light to change, to get the colors that are coming through to be seen differently. And then the other thing that I have learned from the people I've worked with is the need to seek the language of yes. That the language of no just doesn't help them. So if someone comes and asks for something or requests something, I've always saw my role or my job as coming up with what is necessary for me to say yes. So I always try to never jump at a no, but I would sit and talk with people about, okay, for me to say yes, these are the things that are necessary. I have to be able to do these things or show these things or have these things in place. And I've used both these rotating the prism and seeking the language of yes. In the field of disabilities, I've also worked and been on boards of directors for senior programs and senior centers. And I found that they've been very helpful in those arenas, as well as my own personal family, having a daughter who moved through the teenage years. I found that seeking the language of yes probably challenged me more than anything else during those days. But as an example of what I'm referring to is a young man who 35 years ago used crutches, and doctors and many people wanted him to change over to a wheelchair. And he was pretty adamant in not doing so, that he saw those crutches as his last stance of being able to be more independent and to be able to self-direct. And so he struggled, and at the same time, he was living in an assisted living home, but he wanted to move to his own apartment. He had significant physical challenges, significant verbal challenges. He had some posture issues, so a number of things that he was working to overcome. But he was also a very fierce and powerful person in the sense of his own willpower. And so ultimately, after fighting it, he ended up using a wheelchair, and then was able to move from a manual chair to a power chair. And he was able to move into his own apartment. But some of the conditions necessary for him again, this would be back in the early 80s, would have been that he had access to food or access to resources that would help him be able to prepare meals. He had to be able to receive some supports in terms of getting in and out of bed, getting in and out of the bathroom and things. And those services were not available back in those days. He overcame them all and lived independently for about 30 years in his own apartment, and then decided that he no longer wanted to live independently, that he was tired, he had fought the battle, he was losing upper body strength, being able to move himself around. And so he asked to come back to an assisted living home, and tried one out and it didn't work. And then tried another one out in which he had an apartment that was on the side of an assisted living home. And that one worked out really well for him. So over the course of 35 years, he and others rotated the Prism constantly in terms of the things that he wanted, the things he was requesting, the things he was seeking, and had to adapt and try different situations. Some worked out and some didn't work out. But he was the person who directed those activities the entire time. And seeking the language of yes, it was important that we recognize the fact that he was a person who was very independent and had willpower to be able to do so. But yet, even back in the early 80s, finding a accessible apartment was a challenge. So to work over the years, it was very important. There's also a story of a young man who lived in an assisted living home, who moved out to his own apartment and started breaking windows in his apartment almost immediately. And he had directed his move to that apartment, something that he wanted, and breaking about a window a week, or if you will, breaking a window every time we repaired it and put a new window in. We were able to understand, as we were able to work with him in rotating the Prism, was the fact that he had left someone behind, someone that he cared about. And he wanted to attempt to correct that. And so in talking to that person, who happened to be a woman, she made it clear, while she didn't share his feelings, she did see him as a friend and would continue to like to live with him and share a house, in an assisted living environment. And so the person chose to move back into that environment and has been there since that day, and windows magically stopped breaking. So again, rotating the Prism and seeking the language of yes. It's part of the struggle that I think people and families face day in and day out. I think it's important to, though, stop, and I know people have seen this today, but I think it's important to stop and review it again. So Alaska does have a shared vision. It is in statute. It is something that gives people permission to attempt to live their life differently than in the past. And the vision is that Alaskans share a vision of a flexible system in which each person directs their own supports based on their strengths and abilities toward a meaningful life in their home, their job, and their community. Our vision includes supported families, professional staff, and services available throughout the state now and into the future. This vision is an affirmative vision. It's an affirmative act. It doesn't set limits. It doesn't deny people. It doesn't say no. It attempts to use the language of yes to be able to give permission. So I want people to start getting that into your minds now, that this vision is affirmative. And for families, I'd like you to hear that the message behind the vision is that adults can direct their own lives, but families and children have a right to direct their own family decisions, their own family culture, and their own family needs. So when we talk about self-directed, I think every family out there can also hear the words family-directed. Again, the concept of right to risk has been around for at least 40 years. And early on in my career, it was just the words right to risk were utilized. And then it modified to become right to reasonable risk. And then it changed again to right to the dignity of risk. And what I saw was that there was just a constant rephrasing and reshaping of the concept of risk. It really wasn't changing much about what we were looking for and why, but just we kept putting modifications on this idea of risk. So I think it's good today to begin with looking at the definitions of the word risk and reasonable. And so if you go to a dictionary, reasonable begins with being in accordance with reason. Reasonable is not extreme or excessive, and reasonable is moderate or fair. And then under risk, you have the possibility of loss or injury, someone or something that creates a hazard, and something that will lose value or worth. And you can see that the definitions and even the phrase reasonable risk or right to dignity of risk implies limitations and implies a negative, that it's not affirmative. It's not like our concept of the shared culture, the shared vision. It begins to set limits in a person's life. Because when we think of risk, we think of risk-taking, we think of risk aversiveness, we think of risk avoidance, and we think of risk tolerance. Risk and the concepts associated with it really come out of almost an investment strategy, right? That we don't want to invest in something that we're going to lose our money. So we all have different risk avoidance techniques, but they are limit setting. And so I believe that for us to really begin this dialogue in a new era, a new time, and with a new vision, we have to break away from the terms and find some new words and new approaches regarding this issue in order to begin a dialogue that starts from the affirmative and not from the negative. So if I get you all to begin rotating the prism a bit with me, let's just start with a basic changing a new word of opportunity. Now, an opportunity is a favorable junction of circumstances and a good chance of advancement or progress. So you can begin looking at as an opportunity versus risk. And again, remember that risk was the possibility of loss or injury, something that creates a hazard, and something that could lose worth or value. Where opportunity is a favorable juncture. Opportunity is a good chance of advancement or progress. And these are definitions straight out of any dictionary. So you can begin seeing with just looking at the word opportunity and rotating the prism, you can see that we're beginning to move more towards the positive rather than the negative. And I think that can have some great impacts on our thinking and decision making. So again, rotating the prism a bit more, if we look at that opportunity, the word, and change it to a right to reasonable experiences and opportunities, we begin to see that People have a right to reasonable experiences and opportunities. And if we bring it back to our vision, to experience a life within that vision. So rather than a right to the dignity of risk, I'd like us to begin thinking about a right to reasonable experiences and opportunities that allow a person to have life experiences that fall within the affirmative action granted by the shared vision. And we have to think about it. If this right is denied, and this right has been denied for many, many decades for people who experience intellectual and developmental disabilities, it's oftentimes denied for seniors who are aging and want to live at home and can't. And what begins to happen is that society sees them as not being a person. So when you are not living your life in the community and doing community activities, excuse me, and you are away or isolated from society, societies around the world begin to basically not see you. You become invisible. I think that's been something that has been demonstrated time and time again. And so that brings us to, I guess, rotating the prism even more. And again, thinking of this now not as a right to dignity of risk or just a right to an opportunity, but rotate this now to a right to navigate the journey towards personhood. All right, and that's, I think, is what we're all talking about and we need to begin thinking about, is that all of us from birth move towards personhood. It's a concept recognized by the United Nations. It's a concept that's recognized around the world. And there's identification that society see us as a person. And when they see us as a person, we're granted personhood. And that personhood comes to us through a whole variety of activities as we go to school, as we work, as we interact with others, as we become involved in community, as we interact on a community level, as we volunteer. All kinds of different activities help us define and become seen as having personhood. And personhood, I'd like you to hear, in my opinion, is the most basic right that we have as people. That all human beings have a right to personhood. We have a right to be seen as a person, not as an object, not as a thing, and not as a something that is invisible, but we're entitled to be seen, entitled to be heard, entitled to be judged a person. This loss of personhood oftentimes has existed for seniors as people get older and move into nursing homes. Much of their past histories are forgotten about. Staff aren't aware of who they were, what they did. They could have been medical doctors, they could have been psychologists, they could have been firemen, they could have been police, but it's forgotten, and their personhood, or their being seen as a person, begins to drift away and to become more isolated. It certainly happens for the homeless. The walking down the street and not noticing the homeless who might be camped there. If a person is drinking and sleeping it off on a street corner, that person might be there most of the day with very little interactions or assistance. And it happens for the poor. And I believe it's happened to people who experience intellectual and developmental disabilities around the world. That journey towards personhood has been stopped. And so I'd like us to really begin thinking today about, it's not a right to reasonable risk, or it's not a right to a dignity of risk, okay? Because risk, again, is a limit-setting concept. That a person has a right to navigate the journey towards personhood. And this journey towards personhood requires a wide variety of interactions, a wide variety of activities and experiences. Some of those things will turn out good, some of those things won't turn out so good. And as we go through life, we've all been faced with that. The first time we went to school, the first time we sent our children off to school, the first time we had jobs, the first time we tried to play sports, the first time we tried to interact with others. The concepts of, again, dating and living independently and going out at night, all those things are activities that make us visible. And that visibility is what helps us be seen as people and allows us to continue in that journey towards personhood. And then as we move into the language of yes, if we're going to begin thinking about that, the opportunity and the journey of personhood, we're still going to have feelings of anxiety. I don't think the journey to personhood for anybody leaves parents, or I think it does leave parents anxious and worried at times. Doesn't matter if a child experiences a disability or doesn't, or their disabilities are more hidden. What it means is that we worry. We have anxiety as our children grow, and we have anxiety as our parents grow. And as our parents age, share with you my own mother, who recently passed away, but wanted to live independently, did not want to go to a nursing home, did not want to go to any type of assisted or supported environment. And so the question becomes, what were the conditions necessary for the language of yes? How could I take an affirmative approach to replace the language of no? So my fear of outcomes, my fear of risk, my worries over whether she would be safe or be hurt or injured or exploited, because she lives in Florida and I lived in Alaska. Excuse me, my voice. But what were the conditions necessary that would allow her to live independently? And so we talked and we looked at some things like technology. So there was a device that would tell me when she took her medications. And then as I found out, it would tell me when she opened the lid. It didn't actually tell me when she took the meds. That was something that we had to work on. There was a device that told me if she forgot to turn the stove off or forgot to turn the kettle off that she was boiling tea. There was a device that showed me there was movement in the house and movement around the house, that the front door was locked, that the front light was on. And although I didn't use them, there were devices that would tell me that her weight was in her bed, what her blood pressure was. All that information became available because of technology. There was also church groups that members were willing to stop by and visit and provide reports to me. There were a variety of hospital people with the same information that we could work it out where they would be willing and able to talk to me because she gave them permission, and we set those things up. So those became the conditions that allowed her to live independently. And we all probably have stories of that, but I'll tell you, it was a very anxious and worrisome time for me. She did not want to come to Alaska. I didn't necessarily want to go to Florida, but I was thinking I might have to. But we worked this out, and for about a decade, things worked out really good, and she was able to continue. as the prism rotates, okay, and if you are willing, it moves us from a right to risk to a right to personhood, right? So then I would challenge all of us. How do we prevent the loss of personhood for our children? How do we prevent the loss of personhood for our aging parents? How do we provide them opportunities to have meaningful experiences throughout the course of life? How do we help them support favorable junctions of circumstances that result in a good chance of advancement along that journey of personhood? And ultimately, then, what are the conditions that are necessary to each of us to use the language of yes and give permission for them to have those experiences? And this is the point where I would like to stop and pause and turn this into a dialogue. It might be a little more challenging being that we're on video, but I'm happy to answer questions about the presentations, but what I'm really looking for would be people willing to share an example and then to help us together begin thinking about what conditions could be necessary for that opportunity to be experienced. So I'm going to step back for a moment and I guess turn it over to Katie or someone to begin the process of the questions. Whoop. Katie, are you there? Or maybe I could just do it from here. Are there questions about the presentation or someone willing to talk about a particular opportunity that they would like to examine the conditions necessary? Katie, can you hear me?
Yes.
Is there a way for me to get back? There we go. So there's the one chat.
So it says, how do you get staff to buy in on this?
I believe it's lots of dialogue, and I always approach it as a conflict resolution process. That I think when a person is seeking an experience, it's going to their first birthday party away from home, or playing at the playground, or walking to school alone, or spending some time outdoors independently. Those are moments where a person says, I want to experience this, and it does add to their personhood. Then if people are worried about the negative part, that this could happen, something bad could happen, I usually find going into some type of a conflict resolution process to be the best way of getting buy-in from all sides. Now, that conflict resolution process is the beginning of rotating the prism. So I would ask staff to begin talking with the person or examining what are their motivations, what are they seeking, what are their feelings, why is this important to them, how is it important to them, trying to help people understand, and then reflect on, well, what did they do when they when they had the same experience. And many of us can do that. Many of us can think back about, well, the first time I walked to school, or the first time I rode my bike without training wheels, or the first time I played outside, the first time I met with friends that weren't friends. They're just people I met for the first time and became friends with. So I would accept it as a conflict resolution process and begin working with the idea of, again, rotating the prism, and then getting people to basically begin to identify and write down what are the conditions necessary. So if I can give an example, a person who was self-directing that they wanted to ride a bus, and many people were afraid. The parents were afraid. The staff was afraid. So we talked about, all right, why? What was this person trying to accomplish? And the person was able to share the desire to be more mobile, more independent, to go places, and not to be dependent upon others to give them rides everywhere. We talked about, well, what were the conditions necessary? And, safety was a high factor. So the conditions necessary became that first staff rode from point A to point B with the person, and there was no transfers. And then the person would go to point A and see the person get on the bus, then drive ahead and be at point B and see the person get off the bus. Okay, and had introduced the person to the bus driver and to some other people who were common riders on that route. Then the person would let the individual walk to the bus stop on their own, but would shadow them, would be in the background, not walking with them, but walking behind them. And they would gradually phase out to where they would just be waiting at the bus stop for that person to come in. And over the course of time, the person learned how to ride the bus. The issue of safety was it literally was able for people to accept the fact that in a very safe way, this person could experience and learn a new skill. And so I go back to conflict resolution and trying to help people work through the anxieties and the fears that are normally felt by everybody in these moments.
So I have one hand up and one comment. The comment from Leslie is, I love the words rotating the prism. That is exactly what I needed to hear. I think sometimes we think we are stuck with what we decide on, but there really are a lot of choices out there. And then Tricia has their hand up.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so this probably kind of goes along the lines of the question that you just answered about getting staff to kind of buy into this concept. It seems like this is kind of going against the grain from a traditional parenting skill as well. And I feel like not only are these new concepts that are emerging are going against a traditional system that we're in, they're also going against, like, traditionally speaking, parenting skills with their kids. And that's sometimes kind of a challenge to work with families and getting them to see this opportunities for their kids. So what would you suggest are some kind of tips in working with families on trying to see them or show them a different way to do this, or to kind of provide these opportunities in this unique or different way approach? Hopefully that.
Yeah, I have found that it's very important to be specific, objective, and to keep lists. So as I would talk to parents, you begin asking questions about what is it that you fear, what is it that concerns you, what is it that you think could happen, and then begin developing a list of, well, how could we help prevent that? And so if I think in terms of, again, I can share a couple of stories. One young woman who wanted to go to college out of state because all of her friends were going to college out of state. And she wasn't able to get into, the schools to be able to do so. And it was a very sad and hurtful thing for her to see her friends leaving where she couldn't. Three of her friends, all at different places, agreed to host her as a visitor at different times while they were in their freshman year. And so the families talked about, again, making this list. Well, she can get lost on the plane, or she could get lost off the plane. Well, okay, we were able to identify that there were systems in the airports and the planes and the airlines that could do escorts, that could help a person move along from point A to point B, that would drop a person off only to another adult person on the other end. There were awareness of the parents of who the friends were and their comfort with the friends. And then there was an opportunity for the individual or herself to plan the trip, to save up money to take the trip. And she went on to do all three of those visits. And for her, got to understand what it was that her friends were doing and where they were going. There's another man who worked in a kitchen most of his life and got progressively more frustrated, more angry about always wearing an apron, always doing dishes, those kinds of things. And he had a dream of living independently, but in a rural Alaska. He wanted to live in a cabin. He wanted to, he had just a dream or a belief that he could live on his own in a cabin and survive. Now, again, lots of concerns, lots of worries, lots of fears that people had. And we, again, created that list of, okay, what are the things that could go wrong? And then countered it with a list of what are the things that would have to be necessary then to prevent that. And we were able to get the person a job at a remote lodge, and he had his own cabin at that remote lodge, but had daily contact with the lodge owners and had a job at the lodge in which people saw him every day. And he then had relationships with people around the area and helped them out and interacted with them and became a very important member of that particular community. But in both cases, I guess my advice would be that we stop the language of no, because the first responses in both the things that I described was a no. No, the person can't. And so all right, why are you saying no? What is it about this that worries you? What is it about this that you fear? What is it about you that, what's causing you the anxiety? And then the next step was, okay, what then would be necessary for you to not have that anxiety? And so I'm hoping I'm answering your question, but that's the heart of the process for me, is to again not start with a no, But to start with the yes. I can, even my own daughter growing up and, wanting to date, and how do you make that decision? How to be anxious, and trying to figure out strategies that would allow her to have those freedoms and me not to have the anxiety that I had as a father. They're all part of the same things that we experience as parents. And I guess my urging for people is to just begin first by not saying no, but ask yourself the question immediately: what are the conditions necessary for me to be able to say yes to this request for this person?
And sometimes you got to get creative. Kimberly has her hand up.
Yeah, I'd be interested in exploring what I often see with adolescents, young adults, is that they haven't been really active parts of the community at large. They haven't had some experiences that would then lead them to have goals and interests that they want to explore. They haven't had that exposure. And how to help people who are supporting the individual see that as something that is a part of being a person and growing into adulthood, is to start to explore some of these other experiences that may have concerning elements to them. When that individual themselves is not asking for it because they do not know about those opportunities.
I agree with the concept that you're saying. I've often said to people, you can't call yourself a fisherman until you sit in a boat in the rain for 4 hours and don't catch fish. And if you want to go back, you're a fisherman. But I think it's the same kind of a thing. If I say to somebody, do you want to go fishing, and they've never been fishing, how do I know that they want to go? How do they know that they want to go? If I ask someone, do you want to take a vacation, and they've never had a vacation? Do you want to go hiking, and they've never been hiking? Do you want to go to church, and they've never been to church? So I believe for people of any age, even seniors, that if people who have lived or had experiences that have limited the access they had to trying different things, you have to get into some type of a experiencing opportunities to give that experience. So you have to begin trying some things, and it may not work. So going to a coffee shop, and then you see or you observe the behavior, or you talk to the person about what they're experiencing. Going to a movie or theater, you might go to a theater, you might talk to the actors and the stage managers to show how a play operates and how trapdoors work and things like that. And the person begins to have an experience, and then you basically see whether they like it or not. I've tried lots of things once and never went back. Okay, and I've tried other things many times and keep going back. But I think your point is a very valid one, is that, and again, I think it's part of the culture of disabilities for so long that has said no. The answer is no, you can't do this because of this fear I have. And again, I'm including myself, not, that as a parent, I learned to stop myself and first ask the question, what are the conditions necessary? And I think there just has to be supports that allow a person to try a wide variety of things. And then what we do is we begin to learn. I think they used to be referred to as interest inventories. And I don't like using those kinds of words with people, about people, but that's what they meant by that. Is they'd say, well, you have to develop an interest inventory for this person. So what are their interests? What do they talk about? What do they like to look at TV? What do they point out? What makes them happy? And so sometimes it's like just horses, farm animals, you know. It might be driving, and so ATVs and snow machines. It might be shooting and hunting. And I think we have to, in today's world, reject the gender issues that come up and reject the practice of saying no, and to begin looking at just giving people the opportunities at a very young age. And I believe they will show us in their interest whether or not it's something that they like or want to do again. Do I like to do art? Do I like music? Do I like to listen to music? Do I like to play music? Do I like poetry? There's so many things that people who experience intellectual and developmental disabilities in the past have never been allowed to experience. So they don't know really what is it? You know, what is it like? Sometimes the summer camps provide those opportunities because the activities are always different each day. But I think if that's what you meant, I'm aligned that we just have to become more assertive about giving people those experiences in ways that we can say yes because our anxieties have been reduced.
We have another question in the chat. From the examples you are giving, how do you come up with the problem-solving techniques and the people to bring together? Like, sometimes it's difficult to see past certain things or negative things. Are there tools to use?
I have found for myself that tools, objective tools, don't necessarily help. They usually hinder the dialogue because the person's filling out a form or filling out a report. And so again, what I would think is a more productive way maybe to help identify people in the family group or people in the neighborhood group or people in the agency or the organization who are active listeners, who can talk with somebody and begin to pick up on the things that interest them or the things that they like. They might be able to pick up on the things that are fearful or fearsome for somebody. And sometimes you really do hit a roadblock. I can just share a story of some staff who wanted to take an individual swimming and kept getting no's, but all they got into was a conflict of demanding to wanting to go, and the conflict of the guardian saying no. And then when we finally got people to sit down and talk and not have any tools, but just a very informal chat about why does this conflict exist, what we found out about is that the person had been abused once and taped into a wheelchair and put into a pool. And the guardian's fear that could happen again, the guardian's fear that could take place. So how do you then go from that fear to giving people an opportunity? Well, it would involve the guardian being present to be able to see and observe, and whether or not the person was going to be anxious or afraid of the water, or whether the person would have fun in the water. So I think the real tool is one in good old-fashioned informal dialogue. and being able, maybe the tool is asking the right questions, of having someone who has the skill and asking the questions that will help someone feel comfortable in saying what they're afraid of, or what they really are seeking. Does that make sense to people?
All right, this is Mary.
Yes.
Do you have suggestions or recommendations for parents of young children about how to help encourage the parents to allow their children to be a part of decision making, and to experience some failure or mistakes, and to not be so controlling of their environment and protective of their environment?
It's a significant challenge for people, and for many people. And so one approach could be like parent support groups. And I don't mean 20 families in a support group, but 2 families or 3 families who are willing to meet with each other, or videotape with each other, or just conference call with each other, enough to talk about, well, this is something my child wants to do, or I would like my child to have this experience. And then to begin talking through, okay, what are those strategies to say yes? Another approach is just to start with the very basics of what color shirt do you want to wear today? What color socks do you want to wear today? And to allow the child the opportunity, the freedom to make those choices. It might be to find a safe and supportive play groups, or church groups, or neighborhood groups that allow that. Another story, that a young girl who lived in a more remote community, who never got invited to anything, didn't get invited to other people's birthday parties, didn't get invited to sleepovers, didn't get invited to the normal things that young girls get invited to. And a volunteer who was working with her and with the family came up with the idea, what if you bought a play set, a swing set? Because in that remote community, there were no swing sets. And so the family was able to work out a way of getting a swing set delivered and set up. And every child in the community came by to play on the swing sets. And then all of a sudden, this individual started getting invited to the parties and to the sleepovers, and started having her own. And so sometimes it is making a decision to attract other children to your home, which allows you to maybe control more your sense of fear, because it's happening in your home versus your child going to another home. It is I find that the young children are able to make decisions on certain things, but should not be given the decisions to make about other things. All right. So maybe the decision of what food to eat versus whether I'm going to eat or not, or the decisions of what warm jacket to wear versus not wearing a jacket, or the decisions of which of two TV shows to watch that you've picked out ahead of time, which of two movies could they watch. Mary, can you think of an example of something that we could explore right now that might help answer that question for a family with a young child more?
I didn't have anything specific. I was just thinking more about, you know, a lot of families really work hard to control their child's environment, right? To make it safe. A lot of young kids have really rigid routines, and, you know, so you're trying to prevent meltdowns and you're trying to just kind of keep the peace in your house. I mean, I know that was true for me when my son was younger, and so I didn't always let him make a lot of decisions because I wanted control over what was happening so that we didn't have meltdowns, and you know, we were able to move from one thing to the next and kind of get through our day. But
and I do think that is something that has to be part of the, if you will, the equation or part of the list. I think it's perfectly legitimate to have one of the conditions necessary is that we have to get through our day. You know, one of the conditions necessary for this to happen is that we have to be able to have a dinner at this time, and we have to have bedtime at this time. And one of the conditions necessary is that we can't have meltdowns. So I don't think that we exclude those, but we build them in and then begin problem solving. How do we address that? How do we fix that? I know that it's never easy. This is not a simple thing, but I do believe that if our solution is just to say no, that begins to build then another problem, another process, another challenge where the person is more isolated or has less experiences in making those choices. So it might just be that a person can handle one choice a day without there being a meltdown. And then after a long time, you go to 2 choices a day. But it is a very, it's very acceptable to put in as one of the conditions necessary that the family life has to be protected. I see there's some other chats coming up.
Yeah, so there's a comment. I love this concept. It seems so simple to just shift to a yes mode from a no mode. But as a parent, we can sometimes be so fearful of the risk that we focus on that rather than the reward to the individual. These examples are so empowering to allow for choice and autonomy. Thank you for this mental shift.
I think again, to come back to the basic concept though of for all of us, whether it's our parents or our children or even our spouses, it's if my first line of defense is a no, then I've set limits and I'm adding to a longer term challenge or issue for that person. If my first attempt is to say, I'd like to be able to say yes, now let's figure out the conditions necessary for me to do that. You begin opening the door, and it may just be baby steps to begin with. I said it might just be one decision a day, or one decision to begin with. It might be, but if that step causes conflict in the family or harm in the family, then the conditions aren't being met. Because no one should have a condition that basically allows other aspects of the family to suffer for this to happen. So, but it's just the beginning again of saying the best thing I can do for my child is to help them to be seen as a person by society. And I believe that they will be seen as a person more if they are volunteering, if they are taking part in other community activities, if they're attending church, if they're going to community events, and if they're out, and sometimes it might just be that they're recreating with the family, that they're at the beach with the family rather than at the beach alone. But it's just, again, the concept of trying to break it down. And I believe in informal dialogues. So I would not have one of these conflict resolution dialogues sitting in a group meeting, right? It isn't going to work. It's a one-on-one. It's help me understand what makes you afraid. Help me understand, what do you see as the benefits of doing this? What do you see as the benefits of saying no? And you have a dialogue, and that's where I think perhaps some small groups of families, maybe I said 2 or 3 at a time, who are helping each other, or maybe we just begin with 2 families that work together, they have the same age child, and they start having that conversation of what does this happen, and I'm perfectly happy to also just offer more individual thoughts and ideas, and even if there's a family member out there who just wants to have a dialogue about the things that make them fearful and seeking a language of yes, I'm more than happy to follow up outside of this meeting and session. It's something I believe in, I'm certainly passionate about, and something that I believe, as we have a new vision and we have a new era that's beginning, and I think the opportunity is there now to stop this whole focus on risk and begin thinking about the focus on the opportunity and the focus on personhood. And so unless there's other questions or comments or something I can give some feedback on, I believe that would wrap up my presentation.
Are there any other comments for Roy from the group? I just had a quick comment, Roy, about,
Sure.
You said talking with other families who have, children of similar age, and, finding that support. I think for us, when my son was really young, we were really new to Alaska and didn't know a lot of other families, but my mom was here. And so grandma says yes to everything, right? And that was sort of what helped us learn to not say no to everything, right? And not be so protective. It's like, well, like if grandma's willing to let him do it, then maybe we should give it a try. But having that outside voice support does make a difference. You know, if someone else thinks it might be okay, then you can kind of reconsider. And if grandma thinks that it would be safe, maybe it is worth giving it a try. Or letting her deal with the consequences if it doesn't work out.
Yeah. No, it's and again, I think what you're describing when you first came up to Alaska, there certainly was a time not too far in the past where there was very little supports for anybody. And now there's the Stone Soup Group is there, and there's agencies, and there's camps and processes, and certainly not a lot, I'm not trying to say that everything's good and perfect out there, but even some faith-based groups and stuff where people are willing to basically provide that support, so a family can reach out to someone they trust. And I think that's probably the most important part. The family has to socially trust whoever it is that they're working with, and to be able to have that dialogue. But I hear you. There's nothing worse than moving into an area, being brand new yourself, not having social connections and contacts, and trying to make those decisions.
Yeah, it's not easy, but it does pay off. So, you know, I mean, personally, you know, my son's almost 25 now, but he's learned how to make decisions, and some of them weren't great decisions along the way, but he's figured it out, and, you know, is doing pretty well now. So some of the rough times were worth it to have the independence now, right?
I know for my own daughter as a teenager, I had taught my dog, a lab, sign language, where he would bark once on one sign and bark two on another sign. And so I always got her to ask the dog if she could do something or not do something. And the dog would say one bark or two barks based on the sign I was given. And I got away with that for a while.
Okay. Well, thank you, Roy. Really appreciated the conversation today. And there are folks in the chat asking for your email if they want to follow up with you. Are you okay with us sharing that?
Yeah. You have the Scheller at hopealaska.org.
Okay. And we can also, we can share that afterwards with the group, and we will be sending out an evaluation. So I really would appreciate folks filling that out. Helps us to continue to do this and to make improvements. This is still new to us, learning how to do this online and provide virtual trainings for you. So really do appreciate your feedback and your comments so that we can continue to improve this going forward. We will meet one more time next Wednesday at 2 o'clock, and next Wednesday's presentation will be Yari Walker, and to talk more about culture and how that affects how we lead person-directed lives. So if there are no other questions, I think that'll wrap it up for today. Thanks again, Roy. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Yeah.